Enrique Acevedo is a Univision anchor, and he joins us today. Enrique, thank you for coming on. So ICE, in addition to the many things that it does, of course, it arrests and deports thousands and thousands of criminal aliens, illegal aliens in the United States who've been convicted of felonies, and it deports them. That is its job. No other agency does that. If we abolish ICE, who will do that?
But I think part of the problem is that there's a lot of confusion about what ICE is. And the confusion in part has to do with the fact that many people believe that their job is, as you were describing in your introduction, to try to stop immigrants when they want to come through the border. That's the Border Patrol's job. That's not ICE. ICE's mission has to do with human trafficking. It has to do with trying to prosecute the companies that are hiring and exploiting undocumented immigrants in the United States. And part of the problem is that it has stayed away from that mission and is not only focused on mass deportation.
But again, ICE, and you may not agree with everything that ICE does, but if we abolish ICE, who will arrest the thousands and thousands of convicted felons who are in our country illegally, who will interdict the fentanyl that's flowing across our borders from Mexico? Who will fulfill those roles? Who will protect the country? No one seems to be answering that.
Well, first of all, the vast majority, I would say 80% of those arrested by ICE are people who have no criminal records. They're not rapists or murderers. They're not criminals. They're just undocumented immigrants. They're only.
But I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying that there are a lot of criminals. And what will we do? I understand. I understand. We can debate whether, that should be a crime that we prosecute for. But we do know that there are, as Donald Trump said, and roundly mocked for saying it, there are actually rapists who come in. I'm not saying there are millions of them, but there are some. There are thousands of convicted felons in this country illegally. Without ICE, do we just let them stay? I mean, what is the answer, since the left is calling for the abolition of ICE?
I don't know if there are thousands of them, and I'm sorry about the wind. We're in a high rise here in Mexico City, but I don't know if there are thousands of them. I would say there are some cases, and then we have police officers, we have law enforcement that can take care of that. I don't think ICE has to be worried about that. Like I was saying, it has to be worried about human trafficking organizations, about companies that are employing and exploiting undocumented workers, that are attracting a lot of undocumented immigrants into the U.S., and not focusing solely on separating families and on mass deportation.
So, in other words,
right now.
In other words, you don't care really what happens to those criminals within our borders. I mean, that's of course the answer. Let me ask you a more basic question: should someone who overstays his visa in the United States be deported?
I think we can use our resources much better, much better.
Okay. So if you overstay your visa, you get a tourist visa, come to the United States, and this happens, hundreds of thousands of times annually, and you ignore the length of your visa, you're here illegally, should you be deported?
Well, of course, I think if you are in the country without documents right now, you should have to follow the right process. And the process right now calls for deportation. This is the thing. There are millions of people in that situation. Who do we deport first? How do we start? Do we deport families that have been here for 15, 20 years, obeying the laws? Or should we start by people who have committed a crime? That should be the focus.
But maybe hold on. But maybe without ICE, we're not going to be. Hold on. Without ICE, we're not going to be deporting people who committed crimes. So I'm asking, on the other end, can we even deport people who've overstayed their visas? Let me ask you this: if illegal immigration makes a country so much better,
you have to make a choice.
If importing poor people from the third world,
who do you deport first?
Okay, we actually don't have very. No, we can afford this. But I want to ask you though, if importing a lot of poor people from Central America makes your country better, why hasn't it made Tijuana better to have thousands of Central Americans there?
When was the last time you went to Tijuana, Tucker? Because I'm happy to go with you. We can go next week. They have incredible restaurants. The city is, much better than it was a couple of decades ago. It's
I grew up next to Tijuana. I've been there a lot. I've been there a lot.
Incredible establishment. So let's go to Tijuana so you can see it's not the horrible place you just described.
Look, what I'm not saying it's a horrible place. What I'm saying is that there are hundreds of thousands of people in Tijuana in legal limbo. Mexico doesn't want to let them stay. And my question is, why not? If having undocumented immigrants, as you describe them, in your country makes your country better, then why doesn't Mexico give them all Mexican citizenship tomorrow and let them vote in the upcoming presidential election? Real question.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, since Donald Trump became president, Mexico has deported over 200,000 immigrants to Central America. 200,000. That's 200,000 immigrants that could be at the U.S. border today. So Mexico is doing something to stop undocumented immigration from flowing to the U.S. Those who decide not to stay in Mexico don't stay not because the Mexican government is asking them to leave. They're deciding to go to the U.S. They don't want to stay in Mexico because they're fleeing violence. And like we've discussed before, Mexico is not exactly a safe haven when you want to flee violence.
Well, no, but wait a second. There were 1,800 murders in Tijuana last year. 1,800 murders. If, again, having hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants from Central America in your city makes it better, then why did you have 1,800 murders last year? I mean,
Tucker,
you know the point I'm making,
10
which
cities
is
in the U.S. that have a higher murder rate than Tijuana.
No, actually, you can't. That's not true. You cannot name 10 cities in America with a high. Name them. There aren't 10 cities with a higher murder rate, so I'm not going to embarrass you.
Gun-related violence in this country, right?
Look, let me just say this. Do you really believe
33,000 people die each year because of gun-related violence in this country? That's a fact, isn't it?
The majority of those are
So the U.S. is also a very violent country. And there are also many cities that have violent crime, like Chicago, like Detroit.
Okay.
None of them are in the border, by the way.
There's no reason to flack for Mexico. There's no reason to be a PR agent for the country of Mexico here. You don't need to defend Mexico. I'm just asking you a question as someone who understands Mexico.
No, of course not.
You know as well as I that when you have an influx of poor people with low education levels and no jobs, it does not make you richer. It makes you poorer. So why are you pretending that the United States benefits from taking in millions of poor people with low education levels?
I can think of many examples of immigrant families that came to the U.S. with nothing and then became dynasties. The Kennedys, for example, from Ireland, which I think is also the country of your family's background. So, you know, that's just one example. The Rockefellers, many of them came to the U.S. without a penny in their pocket, and they became dynasties.
Yeah, I'm actually not Irish, but that's not the point.
So that's not exactly.
Okay. Okay, so
no, but you were saying that
true,
when they come into the country.
What I'm saying is they're very impressive immigrants. I would never deny that. I know a lot of them, and they're great people, and I'm glad they're here. But when you import millions of poor people into your country gets poorer.
You wouldn't think so from
Let's be honest. Let's stop lying about it. Yeah, okay. No, this is a reality-based show.
No, it's good for the economy. Immigration is good for the economy, Tucker, and it's widely proven.
It's been great for Tijuana. Yeah, that's why you're kicking them out. Great to see you. Thanks very much. Joining us now is former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino. Dan, even I, cynical as I am, 27 years of doing this, am a little bit surprised by the instantaneous response to this executive order, which I'm skeptical of in the first place, I would say. But for people who've been calling for this for the last week, when they finally get it, to immediately attack it, tells you something really important, I think.
It does, Tucker, and I don't know why America is still pretending that with the radical far left we're dealing at all with principled people. I mean, we know this exact same thing. The detention of minors who were brought across the border illegally happened under Obama, and the intensity of the coverage, Tucker, was nowhere near this. So let's all stop pretending that liberals give a damn about immigrants. I'm not suggesting all Democrats. I'm telling you the radical far left. I'm looking in the camera and telling you my experience with these goons is they don't give a damn about these kids. What they care about are open borders and raw voting power that they're losing to working class Americans who realize what liberals really are. That's the real goal. It has nothing to do with principles at all.
I've got a bunch of kids. If I go to jail and am separated from them by force, even before I'm convicted, by the way, people who haven't been proved guilty spend a lot of time in jail in this country. Will anyone make my case for me? Will anyone weep for me? Will any other cable news anchor start crying in the middle of a broadcast over my children, do you think?
No, you're a conservative commentator. They're police staters. They'll actually celebrate throwing you in jail without probable cause for even arrest, by the way. But that's a whole other topic on Spygate we can talk about another time. But, Tucker, this is a pure political play for them. You have to understand, liberalism is dead. It's a vacuum. They don't stand for anything. Their policy platforms are not tenable. They can't put up a campaign sign that says, give us your money, give us your health care, and let us take over the public schools because they're doing peachy. So what do? They have to replace all those lost votes with fear and replacing them with open borders and endless people coming into the country uncontrollably that they can use to steal their votes through absentee balloting, voter fraud, and other things, and endless entitlement programs. They don't have a backup plan.
I think you're right. I remain totally opposed to separating people from their kids, especially American citizens, by the way. My views have not changed on that. Dan, thank you.